If civilization has a birthplace, it is buried beneath dust, broken bricks, and the silence of 5,000 years. Long before empires marched beneath banners, before kings ruled from marble halls, before history learned how to write itself, there was a city that should not have existed at all. It rose from marshland and river mud, built by people who had no precedent to follow, no ancestors to imitate, and no idea that their choices would shape the future of humanity. And then, just as mysteriously as it appeared, it vanished. Not destroyed in a single night, not erased by a conquering army, but lost piece by piece, until even its name became uncertain. This is the story of the lost Sumerian city that may have started civilization itself. To understand why this city matters, we must return to a world that does not yet recognize itself. Around 6,000 years ago, the southern plains of Mesopotamia were not the dry, broken landscape we imagine today. They were wetlands, fed by the slow, unpredictable movements of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. These rivers did not behave like the Nile, flooding gently and predictably. They surged, shifted, destroyed, and rebuilt. To live here required constant negotiation with nature. And yet, people came anyway. They came not because the land was forgiving, but because it was rich. Silt deposited by floods made the soil fertile beyond anything early humans had seen. With irrigation, grain could be grown in quantities large enough to support people who did not farm at all. Artisans, builders, priests, administrators. For the first time, humanity stood on the edge of something revolutionary, the possibility of permanent urban life. But cities do not simply appear, they must be imagined before they can be built. Somewhere in this river-laced landscape, a settlement began to grow beyond what was normal. Houses clustered tightly together. Storage buildings multiplied. Canals were dug and maintained. Temples rose not as huts, but as monumental structures meant to dominate the skyline. This was not a village anymore. It was something else, something new. And whoever lived here understood it. We believe this city existed before most of the names we recognize from ancient history. Before Uruk reached its height, possibly even before Eridu, long considered the earliest city in the world. But this city does not sit comfortably in the archaeological record. It appears in fragments, in myths, in flood stories, in broken tablets that reference a place that should be there, but isn't. The Sumerians themselves spoke of a time before kingship descended from heaven, when cities were founded by divine will. Their king lists begin not with men, but with gods. And at the top of these lists is a city described as the first, the place where order began. But when archaeologists try to match this city to the ground beneath their feet, the evidence becomes slippery. One candidate rises again and again: Eridu. According to Sumerian tradition, Eridu was the first city, founded by the god Enki, the deity of wisdom, water, and creation. Its temple, the Iozon, was said to sit above the freshwater abyss that sustained life itself. Excavations at Eridu reveal something astonishing. Layers upon layers of temples rebuilt again and again in the same sacred spot over centuries. This suggests continuity, reverence, and memory. But Eridu, as impressive as it is, does not fully satisfy the mystery, because Eridu was not lost. It was abandoned slowly as rivers shifted and coastlines changed. Its ruins remain visible. Its story is traceable. But the city described in the earliest myths seems older still, more elusive, a place remembered more as an idea than a location. Other candidates emerge, cities swallowed by sediment as the Persian Gulf coastline retreated. Settlements now buried under meters of alluvium, unreachable without massive excavation. Some may lie beneath modern cities, others beneath farmland, others still beneath water. The problem is not that the city did not exist. It is that Mesopotamia has been constantly rewritten by rivers for thousands of years. What once stood proudly above ground may now lie deeper than archaeologists can easily reach. And then there is the flood. Nearly every Sumerian myth cycle contains a flood story. Not metaphorical, Not symbolic, but physical. A great deluge sent by the gods, wiping out humanity, sparing only one man warned in advance. His name varies: Zeus Sudra, Atrahasis, Utnapishtim, but the story remains consistent. The world is destroyed, civilization is reset, and afterward, kingship begins again. For centuries, scholars dismissed this as myth. Then, in the early 20th century, archaeologists uncovered something disturbing: thick layers of flood sediment in multiple Mesopotamian sites, all dating to roughly the same period. This was not a local disaster. It was regional, catastrophic, enough to destroy cities entirely. If the lost Sumerian city exists before this flood, and if it lay in a low-lying region, it may not have survived. In any recognizable form, its bricks would have dissolved, its walls collapsed, its people scattered or killed, and its memory preserved only in story. This possibility changes everything, because if a city exists before the flood, layers we can identify archaeologically, then it belongs to a shadow era of civilization, one that precedes our timeline of history. A civilization before civilization, erased so thoroughly that only whispers remain. Yet those whispers are persistent. The Sumerians did not invent writing suddenly. The earliest proto-cuneiform tablets appear fully formed, already complex, already capable of administration, accounting, and record-keeping. This implies a long period of development beforehand, one that left few traces. Writing, like cities, does not emerge overnight. It evolves. It requires systems, bureaucracy, memory. Where did those systems come from? Similarly, Sumerian religion arrives fully articulated. A pantheon, rituals, sacred architecture, myths explaining the structure of the universe. These are not the beliefs of a people just beginning to organize. They are inherited, refined, remembered. It is possible, unsettlingly possible, that the lost Sumerian city was not merely the first city, but the first experiment in civilization itself. A place where humanity learned how to live together in unprecedented density, where mistakes were made, where solutions were found, and where lessons were carried forward after disaster erased the original blueprint. If so, then the cities we know, Uruk, Ur, Lagash, are not beginnings. They are reconstructions. Archaeology struggles with this idea because archaeology relies on material survival. But absence is not proof of non-existence, especially in an environment as destructive as Mesopotamia. Mud brick, the primary building material, erodes rapidly. Floods do not preserve. They annihilate. Some researchers now believe the earliest urban centers may lie beneath what was once the northern Persian Gulf. During the late Neolithic period, sea levels were lower. River systems converged. Settlements could have flourished in regions now submerged. As sea levels rose, these areas disappeared beneath water, taking their cities with them. If true, the lost Sumerian city may never be found, not because it was imaginary, but because it lies beyond our reach. And yet, humanity keeps looking. Every new excavation uncovers hints. A pottery style that appears too suddenly, a trade network that seems too organized, a religious motif that has no clear origin. These are the fingerprints of something older, something foundational. Civilization, it seems, did not begin with a clean slate. It inherited itself. What haunts this mystery is not just the loss of a city, but the loss of its people's voices. We do not know their names, their leaders, their fears. We do not know how they understood the world, or whether they sensed that what they were building would not last. All we know is that they dared to live differently, and that their experiment succeeded enough to be remembered, even after it vanished. The Sumerians believed that cities were gifts from the gods. Perhaps that belief was born from trauma, from the knowledge that cities could be taken away as easily as they were given. The lost city became a warning embedded in myth. Creation is fragile. Order is temporary. Memory is everything. And so civilization began not with triumph, but with loss. In the next part, we will follow the echoes of this vanished city through myth, archaeology, and the minds of the people who inherited its world, and ask whether the first city was ever meant to be found at all. If the lost Sumerian city left no walls standing, it left something far more enduring behind: memory shaped into myth. The earliest people of Mesopotamia did not record their past as modern historians would. They encoded it into stories, rituals, and sacred geography. To them, myth was not fantasy. It was history remembered in a language strong enough to survive catastrophe. Again and again, Sumerian texts returned to a single haunting idea. There was a time before things were the way they are now, a time before kingship, before laws, before cities multiplied across the plains. And that earlier time is never described as primitive or chaotic. It is described as ordered, almost perfect, until it is undone. In the Sumerian king list, one of the most enigmatic documents ever recovered from ancient Mesopotamia, the earliest rulers are said to reign for impossibly long spans of time, tens of thousands of years, entire dynasties lasting longer than recorded history itself. Scholars often dismiss these numbers as symbolic, but symbolism still has meaning. These reigns belong to an age that is not measured like our own. An age separated from later history by a rupture so complete that time itself had to be reimagined. Then comes the line that changes everything. After the flood had swept over and kingship had descended from heaven, kingship was in Kish. This sentence does not describe continuity, it describes reset. Whatever came before the flood is no longer part of the same world. The flood is the dividing line between two realities. Before it, something existed that the Sumerians believed could not fully return. The city before the flood is never described in detail. That absence is telling. It suggests loss too deep for description. Trauma remembered not through imagery, but through reverence and distance. Like a homeland that no longer exists, it becomes sacred precisely because it cannot be revisited. And this is where archaeology and myth begin to speak to each other in uncomfortable ways. In the early 20th century, excavations at and other Sumerian sites revealed a startling pattern. Beneath layers of occupation lay thick deposits of clean river silt. Flood layers, sometimes several meters deep. Above them, civilization resumed. Below them, traces of earlier settlements vanished abruptly. The people who returned rebuilt their cities in the same locations, as if drawn back by memory or necessity. But something had changed. Architecture shifted. Art styles evolved. Administrative systems became more formal. It was not the same world. What is most unsettling is that these flood layers appear across multiple sites but do not align perfectly in time. This suggests not a single global flood, but a series of devastating regional events. To the people living through them, however, the effect would have been identical. The world they knew ended. The rivers betrayed them. The gods withdrew their favor. If the lost Sumerian city lay in the most vulnerable part of this landscape, low, marshy, near shifting river mouths, it may have been erased beyond recovery. Unlike later cities built with defensive walls and elevated foundations, this first city may have trusted its environment too much. Its builders had no precedent for catastrophe on that scale. This possibility reframes the entire Sumerian worldview. Their obsession with order, boundaries, and ritual cleanliness begins to look like a response to chaos remembered. Their gods are not distant abstractions, but volatile forces tied directly to water, wind, and earth. Enki controls fresh water, Enlil commands storms. Inanna embodies both fertility and destruction. These are not symbolic deities. They are explanations for survival. Even writing itself may have emerged from loss. The earliest cuneiform tablets are not literature. They are lists, accounts, inventories, grain rations, labor assignments. Writing begins not as art, but as memory externalized, a way to ensure that knowledge does not vanish when people do. If an earlier city fell without leaving written records, its survivors may have understood the danger of forgetting. Writing, then, becomes an act of defiance against erasure. But the mystery deepens when we consider how advanced Sumerian civilization appears when it enters the historical record. Urban planning, long-distance trade, standardized weights, legal systems. These do not look experimental. they look refined, as if generations of trial and error had already taken place elsewhere. Where? Some archaeologists argue that the answer lies not in a single lost city, but in a network of early settlements now gone. Civilization, in this view, did not ignite at one point, but smoldered across the landscape before flaring into visibility. The lost city becomes a metaphor for a lost phase of development. But others are not convinced. Certain myths insist on singularity, on a first place, a center, a sacred origin. The Sumerians did not speak of many beginnings. They spoke of one city chosen by the gods, one place where order first took shape. Even later Mesopotamian cultures inherited this fixation. Babylon, Assyria, Akkad all saw themselves as inheritors of something ancient. They did not claim to invent civilization. They claimed to restore it. Restoration implies prior existence. Modern technology has begun to reopen questions once thought unanswerable. Satellite imagery reveals buried river channels invisible from the ground. Ground-penetrating radar hints at structures beneath farmland. Underwater archaeology explores submerged coastlines that were once dry land. Each advance raises the same unsettling possibility. We have not been looking in the right places. If the lost Sumerian city lies beneath sediment tens of meters thick, or the Persian Gulf, it may require technologies we have barely begun to develop to find it. A street pattern, a scatter of artifacts that tell us only that something was there, not what it meant. But meaning, for the people who remembered it, was never in the ruins. It was in the warning. The Sumerians lived with an acute awareness that civilization was fragile. Their literature is filled with laments for destroyed cities, fallen temples, abandoned gods. These are not rare texts. They are central. They suggest a culture deeply aware that progress could be reversed. The lost city, then, is not simply a mystery of location. It is a psychological presence, a shadow behind every achievement. A reminder that what humanity builds can be undone not by enemies, but by nature itself. This awareness shaped everything that followed. Kingship was sacred because it was temporary. Laws were divine because human memory was unreliable. Cities were rebuilt because abandoning them felt like surrendering to oblivion. And yet, despite all this effort to preserve order, the first city remained beyond reach. Perhaps that is its final power. Because a city that cannot be found cannot be conquered, rewritten, or claimed. It belongs to no empire, no ideology, no modern narrative. It stands as a question rather than an answer. A reminder that history is incomplete, and that civilization's roots are deeper, darker, and more fragile than we like to believe. In the next part, we will follow the search itself, the archaeologists, the clues, the competing theories, and confront the possibility that the first city may not want to be discovered at all. The search for the lost Sumerian city has never been a single expedition or a single theory. It has been a slow, fragmented pursuit carried forward by generations of scholars who often disagree on almost everything except one thing. Something important is missing from the story of civilization's beginning. Early archaeology in Mesopotamia was shaped as much by expectation as by evidence. 19th century explorers arrived looking for names they already knew. Babylon, Nineveh, places mentioned. In the Bible or classical texts, they dug where maps and legends pointed them, and they found what they were looking for. Monumental ruins rose from the sand, confirming that great cities had once existed. But archaeology, like memory, can be selective. What it does not expect, it often overlooked. The earliest excavations favored high mounds, tells where. Centuries of rebuilding created visible hills. But a truly ancient city, especially one built of mud brick in a floodplain, might never form such a mound. It might be flattened, dissolved, spread thin across the landscape. It might leave no obvious signal on the surface at all. As methods improved, archaeologists began to notice anomalies. Settlements that appeared suddenly in the record with no clear developmental phase. Cultural practices that emerged fully formed. Trade connections that seemed too extensive for societies supposedly in their infancy. These inconsistencies did not prove the existence of a lost city, but they suggested a missing chapter. One of the most provocative ideas to emerge in recent decades is that early Sumerian urbanization began along a coastline that no longer exists. Around 6,000 to 4,000 BCE, the Persian Gulf extended much farther north than it does today. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers merged into a massive estuary, creating fertile wetlands ideal for early settlement. Over time, sediment pushed the coastline southward, burying ancient shorelines beneath layers of silt. If a major city existed along this ancient coast, it could now lie dozens of kilometers inland or beneath the Gulf itself. Satellite imagery has revealed ghostly traces of ancient river systems beneath the desert, branching like veins across the land. Some of these channels converge in places where no known cities existed. These convergence points are precisely where early urban centers would be expected to form. Water, after all, is not just a resource. It is a network. Whoever controlled it, controlled survival. Yet excavation in these regions is difficult. Political instability, modern development, and sheer scale limit what can be done. Archaeology is slow. It requires patience measured in decades, not years. And the deeper one digs, the more ambiguous the evidence becomes. A scatter of pottery shards does not announce itself as civilization's origin. A foundation wall does not explain belief systems or governance. Even if the lost city were found tomorrow, it might still refuse to tell its story clearly. This uncertainty has fueled more speculative interpretations, some grounded, others less so. Popular. The nation has seized on the idea of a forgotten advanced civilization, one that predates known history and passes knowledge forward through catastrophe. While there is no evidence for lost high technology or secret empires, the appeal of such ideas speaks to a deeper discomfort, the sense that our narrative of progress may be incomplete. Serious scholars approach the mystery more cautiously. They point out that early complexity does not require a single origin point. Human societies can innovate independently. Cultural acceleration can happen quickly, under the right conditions. Perhaps the lost city is not a single place, but a compressed memory of many early experiments now blurred together by time, and yet certain details resist this explanation. Sumerian mythology is unusually precise about geography. Rivers are named, cities are ranked, sacred places are located in relation to one another. This is not the language of abstraction. It is the language of people describing a real landscape they believe once existed. Even the gods are localized. Enki's freshwater domain is tied to a specific place. Inanna's descent to the underworld follows a recognizable path. The afterlife itself is imagined as a city, gated, organized, ruled. For the Sumerians, existence was urban by default. Civilization was not a recent invention. It was the natural state of the world, interrupted by disaster. This worldview shapes how they understood themselves. They did not see history as progress from simplicity to complexity. They saw it as decline from an earlier, more complete order. Their task was not to innovate, but to preserve. That belief may explain why the lost city remained so important even as new cities rose. It was not simply the first. It was the ideal. Every city that followed tried, in some way, to recreate it. Temples aligned with cosmic order. Kings claimed divine mandate. Laws were presented as restorations of ancient justice. The past was not behind them. It was above them, watching. And yet, the lost city never reappeared. This absence forces a difficult question. What if the city was never meant to be found again? What if its disappearance was not an accident, but an inevitability built into the environment that created it? The same rivers that allowed civilization to emerge also ensured its instability. Channels shifted, floodplains expanded and contracted. Entire regions transformed within a few generations. A city perfectly adapted to one configuration of the landscape could become unviable almost overnight. If the lost city was deeply integrated with its environment, dependent on specific water flows, specific coastlines, then its destruction may have been total. Not violent, but absolute, slow drowning beneath sediment and time. This kind of loss leaves no dramatic ruins, no fallen walls, no final stand, just absence. Perhaps that is why the Sumerians framed the flood as divine judgment. Human agency struggles to process gradual, impersonal erasure. Gods give shape to forces that cannot be negotiated with. Blame becomes a way to make sense of powerlessness. In this light, the lost city is not just an archaeological puzzle. It is a mirror. It reflects humanity's earliest confrontation with impermanence at scale. The realization that even the most ambitious creations can be undone without intent or malice. And still, the search continues. Because to find the first city would be to anchor civilization's story in something tangible. To know where it began. To touch the ground where humans first chose to live together, not out of necessity, but out of vision. In the next part, we will confront the most unsettling possibility of all, that the lost Sumerian city is not hidden from us by chance, but by the limits of how we understand history itself. At some point in the search for the lost Sumerian city, the question stops being where it was and becomes whether our idea of finding it is even possible. Modern archaeology is built to uncover objects, structures, and dates. But the earliest phase of civilization may not have left behind the kind of evidence we expect. Not because it was insignificant, but because it existed in a world that behaved differently from our own. We imagine ancient cities as static places, walls, streets, temples fixed in stone. But the earliest Sumerian urban spaces were likely far more fluid, built of mud brick, reed, and wood, constantly repaired, reshaped, rebuilt. A city that lived and breathed with its environment rather than standing apart from it. In such a world, permanence was not a goal, survival was. This changes how we think about loss. A city like this would not collapse into picturesque ruins. It would dissolve. Each flood would take a little more. Each reconstruction would alter its shape. Over generations, the original form would disappear not through destruction, but through adaptation. By the time catastrophe struck, there may have been nothing left to recognize as the first city at all. The Sumerians may have known this. Their myths do not describe the first city as falling in flames or conquest. It simply ends. The gods withdraw their favor. A flood comes, and afterward kingship begins again somewhere else. The story moves on. The absence is accepted. This acceptance is striking. Later civilizations obsessed over ruins. Greeks mourned fallen cities. Romans preserved monuments. The Sumerians did something different. They mourned loss by rebuilding, not by memorializing. Their laments cry for cities abandoned, but their response was always restoration, not excavation. To them, the past was not something to be uncovered. It was something to be reenacted. This mindset may be the greatest barrier between us and the lost city. We search for origins as fixed points. The Sumerians experienced them as cycles: creation, destruction, renewal. The first city was not unique because it was first, but because it established the pattern. When later kings claimed legitimacy, they did not say they were innovators. They said they were chosen to restore ancient order. Laws were framed as rediscoveries. Temples were rebuilt on older foundations, not out of convenience, but out of obligation. Sacred space mattered more than original structure. This explains why cities like Eridu and Uruk were rebuilt again and again on the same sites, even when floods made them impractical. These places were anchors, physical reminders that continuity mattered more than comfort, that civilization was not defined by ease, but by persistence. If the lost city existed before this mentality solidified, it may have been sacrificed to survival itself, abandoned not because it failed, but because it could not be reconciled with a changed world. Its memory was carried forward, its location was not. This raises an unsettling possibility that the lost city was never meant to endure materially, that it served its purpose simply by proving that civilization was possible. Everything after it was an adaptation. Seen this way, the mystery becomes less about discovery and more about inheritance. The lost city lives on not in ruins, but in systems, in irrigation networks, in administrative logic, in the very idea that human society can be organized beyond kinship and survival. Civilization did not need the city to remain, it needed the lesson, and yet something about this explanation still feels incomplete, because humans do not remember what they do not value. The persistence of the lost city in myth suggests more than mere functionality. It suggests reverence, nostalgia, perhaps even guilt, a sense that something precious was lost and could not be recovered. Why would the first city inspire that feeling unless it represented more than innovation? Unless life there was in some sense better? Some scholars have suggested that early urban life may have been more communal, less hierarchical, before the full rise of kingship and social stratification. The Sumerian king list begins with divine rule, then transitions to human kings after the flood. This could reflect a memory of a society organized differently, one without centralized authority as later civilizations understood it. If the lost city represented an experiment in living together that was later abandoned in favor of more rigid systems, its disappearance may have carried moral weight. A sense that something was traded away for stability. That order came at a cost. This would explain why later Sumerian literature is so deeply ambivalent about power. Kings are necessary but dangerous. Gods grant authority, but also destroy. Civilization is valuable but fragile. The lost city becomes a symbol of both origin and warning. Modern audiences often want clear answers. A map location. A name. A definitive identification. But ancient memory does not work that way. It preserves meaning more faithfully than detail. The Sumerians did not need to know where the first city was. They needed to know what it meant. And what it meant was this. Humanity once crossed a threshold. It gathered, organized, imagined permanence, and then it learned that permanence was an illusion. That lesson shaped everything that followed. In the final part, we will step back and ask the most important question of all, not where the lost Sumerian city was, but why its disappearance still matters, and what it reveals about the nature of civilization itself. The lost Sumerian city remains unseen, not because humanity has failed to search hard enough, but because it occupies a space where evidence thins and meaning deepens. At the beginning of civilization, history does not behave like a straight line. It bends, blurs, and folds back on itself. The farther we look, the less concrete it becomes. And that may be the truest reflection of how civilization actually began. We often imagine the first city as a moment of triumph, walls rising, order imposed, humanity stepping forward into permanence. But the Sumerian memory tells a quieter story. It remembers beginning as something tentative, vulnerable, and deeply uncertain. A fragile agreement between people and landscape, held together not by conquest, but by cooperation and belief. This is why the city could be lost without vanishing entirely. Its physical form dissolved, but its ideas survived. The concept of sacred space, the logic of administration, the belief that society could be organized beyond the family or the tribe. These things did not need stone to endure. They needed transmission, and the Sumerians transmitted them through ritual, myth, and rebuilding. Every city that followed was, in a sense, a continuation of the first experiment. Not a replacement, but a refinement. Each canal dug, each temple raised, each law inscribed was an attempt to stabilize what had once proven unstable. Civilization did not forget its origin. It tried to outgrow it, and yet the fear never fully left. Sumerian literature is haunted by impermanence. Cities fall, gods abandon temples, kings lament their powerlessness. This is not the worldview of a culture confident in its permanence. It is the worldview of a people who know that everything they build stands on borrowed time. That awareness shaped the entire trajectory of human history. It encouraged record-keeping. It elevated law. It placed divine authority above human ambition. It taught societies to anchor meaning not in structures but in continuity. The lost city, then, is not a failure of preservation. It is a success of transmission. It reminds us that civilization did not emerge fully formed and indestructible. It emerged through loss, through adaptation, through the willingness to rebuild after catastrophe without demanding to return to what was. This is a lesson modern civilization still struggles to absorb. We search for origins because we want certainty, a beginning we can point to and understand. But the story of the lost Sumerian city tells us that beginnings are often messy, partial, and unrecoverable. That what matters is not where we started, but what we carried forward. Perhaps that is why the city remains elusive, because to find it would be to misunderstand it, to reduce something vast and foundational to coordinates on a map. The first city was not just a place. It was a threshold, a moment when humanity chose complexity over simplicity, memory over instinct, cooperation over isolation. Once crossed, that threshold could never be uncrossed. And so, the city did not need to survive. Civilization already had. The question it leaves us with is not where it went, but what we are doing with what it gave us. Whether we have learned to live with the fragility it revealed, whether we understand that progress does not erase vulnerability, it only changes its shape. The lost Sumerian city may never rise from the earth again, but it is present in every city that exists today. In every street laid over older ground, in every system designed to outlast the people who created it. History does not always preserve its beginnings. Sometimes, it entrusts them to memory instead. If you want to explore more moments like this, the quiet decisions, the forgotten experiments, and the fragile foundations that shaped our world, then this channel is for you. Subscribe and join us as we uncover the stories history almost let disappear.